J.R. Hawbaker, you designed the costumes for season 4 of Fargo, which tells the story of a mob war in 1950 Kansas City, Missouri. Now, for a season with so many different characters and personalities and storylines, what's kind of the starting point for developing the style of this world?
Oh my goodness, yes. We had a huge ensemble cast, amazing. The starting point, honestly, when you get that much talent in a pool that Noah Hawley like pulls together for you is your actors. Like, I definitely did not waste the inspiration. Just came with who was coming to us. But I guess, oh man, this was also a while ago now. So now I'm trying to remember it all. But basically, let's see here. That huge cast we had some time. I had some time before with Noah before they started rolling in, and Noah was definitely one of the first things he said to me was he didn't want a sepia toned sea of fedoras in a 1950s film. I remember that was one of the early directives. It's like, I don't want them all to look the same. They're definitely in two warring gangs, but they should all have very individualized looks to them. Fargo does masterfully, does character work, right? And you really see each of these individual characters. So that was the challenge for sure, and I definitely took up that challenge. I don't think we put a sea of fedoras in the show, but there was a lot of hats, like a lot of hats. It was almost a drinking game. We had derbies and bowlers and fedoras and pork pies and just everything you can think of under the sun was on that show. But it didn't start, it was really based all in the individual characters and what we were trying to do in their own individual idiosyncratic selves. So Noah and I talked a lot in the beginning, and we'd have individual storyboards with images for each of the characters before I even got in the room with the actors. Usually try to focus on one or two images that just had an evocative tonal nature to where we wanted to go with that character. And then the casting started coming in, and that was pretty incredible. So when you get Jesse Buckley and Ben Whishaw and Tim Oliphant and Jason, and you get all these, incredible actors, then they're bringing their talents to it. So then it was about getting inside of the fitting with these talented actors and falling down a rabbit hole together. And we had really intense one-on-one discussions in the beginning with each one of these actors, because they have so much street credit and so much chops when it comes to what they do that they all really wanted to dig in, and understand each little detail that was in the costumes. So so I think with that big of a cast, to answer your question, it was really a very detailed process, starting with Noah, and then every single item of clothing that went on these actors, we discussed in the fitting room together why they were wearing it, maybe what the colors were making them feel, all the little details.
And two of the central actors you were designing for, Jason Schwartzman and Chris Rock, are playing sort of against type. Like, we don't necessarily always see them as these kind of violent gangster kind of these heavies that they're playing. Mm-hmm. So what was it like to work on their wardrobe to distinguish them from each other, and also kind of bring out their characters from those actors?
Yeah. Well, Chris's character, that was a lot of the fourth season of Fargo. Noah wanted to explore, what the plight of the outsider was in society. And, and in the 1950s storyline, Chris and I and a whole bunch of the Black cast, I'd come to them too, because, I'm not Black. So we'd sit for, like I said, in those those early fittings, we'd sit together and talk about like what that meant, what their family experience was. I had some of the actors bring me photos of their grandparents and their grandfathers. Chris didn't, but some of the other ones did. But Chris did, he told me a story about how he definitely remembers his father, at like one of those garages. He's like, that was my dad and all of his friends. So, when it came to Chris's character, I think we were trying to, for the Black man in that era, by all of these discussions that we had and the story we're trying to talk about, we were trying to say they had to try that much harder, to be accepted. So just walking down the street looking like a thug, he had to try that much harder, Loy, to be accepted. He was probably the most modern thinker of all of them, but had to look the part more than any of them. So that was definitely something that was pushing us forward. He had that, we did a really nice custom blue mohair coat on him. He always looked kind of like the business, the front man, the businessman. And he is a businessman, it's just society won't accept him. So if he was given an alternate path and an alternate economy, he might have done it. He was trying to do it with a credit card and they just wouldn't accept him. So that was part of where we were anchoring him. And then Jason coming in is so wonderful because he's playing against sort of the Godfather stereotype of sorts. And I think that just came out of like, basically, just wonderful sessions with Jason and Noah, just knowing that they wanted to, we were sort of homaging, there were definitely moments where we were homaging the Godfather, but letting Jason do what he does best and disrupt it. So sometimes I'd use the language of those those kind of like that genre, like the wide lapels and the wide ties and the double-breasted suits and the fedora, but the colors were a little off. His fedora was always green, and also I played with proportion on him a lot. His hat was just a little too tall, just ever so, just a little compensating by about 1/2 inch or so. Just little tweaks. It goes back down to those details, little things we were doing to try and be conscious of proportion on him. So it wasn't Al Pacino perfect, just little tiny nuanced proportional changes we were doing with him too from a costume perspective. But he was really the disruptor, Jason. He gets in there and shakes up the feeling of a gangster for sure.
And what kind of considerations went into like the color palette? Because there's, it's a very understated, a lot of tones in the series, but there are also like pops of color on certain characters. Like what kind of what went into those decisions?
Yeah, thank you for noticing. We definitely worked hard on that in the 4th season. We actually had a nickname for the color palette. Dana Gonzalez, our amazing DP, he sort of led the charge in really early concept meetings before we started shooting with Kodachrome. And in the flashbacks in the beginning, in the first episode, we used a little bit of autochrome. But when we got into the bulk of the series, we were using Kodachrome as a look for the era, for sure. It has those primary, pops of, like you were saying, you were noticing the yellow and the red and the green and blues, has these primary pops of color that are really indicative to a lot of the photography of the era. So the production designer, Warren Allen Young, and the DPs and myself and directors were poring over so many images of Kodachrome photography from the era. And that was a coordinated attack for sure. I had the benefit of having worked with Warren, our very talented production designer, for 3 years running now. So when we entered that project, we had been working together for 3 years. So we definitely had a shorthand. And we used to call it the Kodachrome football. That's what we did. We'd like pass it back and forth to each other, because you don't want to be inside of a scene maybe where he has painted the walls in the brighter tones, and then if I also put my actors in, say he's got the walls in primary blue and yellow, and then I do the blue, and maybe it gets a little too aggressive and doesn't have that grounding feeling to it. So we would just be in communication with each other all the time. I was looking at his paint wall samples. He would always send them up to the 4th floor to me, and I'd have little wood chips of all the sets, or I'd walk down to the sets and look around. Sometimes I would get ahead of him and be building a look that I was excited about, and I would text him and be like, hey, I'm thinking about blue mohair for Chris for his jacket. And he's like, I love that idea. Let's do yellow leaves behind it. Like we really were in a dance together trying to achieve that. And it took a lot of communication, but it was also, it was part of the fun stuff. But we called it the Kodachrome football. That's basically what we did. And we would toss it back and forth between sets and costumes to each other to make sure we were creating a nice frame.
And one character who exists kind of on the fringes of this story and becomes very important to several aspects of it, of course, is Jessie Buckley as this really unsettling psychopathic nurse. What were the differences in working on that character and really creating this kind of absurd but also kind of really sinister figure?
Yes, Jessie Buckley, I love working with her. She's the dream. She would show up for fittings, and her character was definitely one of the trickier ones to attack before she got there, because you almost, she plays the part of a very iconic looking nurse, and then you really want to deconstruct that thought. She gets to play the person who is looking like the savior, looking like all the positive roles in society, and then breaks them down. And we waited. I had that notion that I wanted to use iconography of a nurse, but didn't know how we were going to kind of twist it and create a dysmorphia of that. And when Jessie came in, her and we would have racks of clothes. I usually am a little more finessed and focused with like the pieces I have inside of a fitting room, but with her, I'd have like 2 giant racks of clothes. And she's mostly in a nurse uniform for most of the season, but when she gets out of it, you still want her clothes to tell you something about her sense of building herself up to look like the positive ideal in society. And we would really just have to put the clothes on, and she would be able to feel them and feel her way through it too. But that, yeah, I think with her, it started with creating nurse iconography and just leaning into it, not being afraid of it. A lot of times you get a director, and Noah was completely on board too. You get people who are afraid to lean into tropes, right? That's the 4-letter word in our world is tropes. But we almost wanted to go ahead and lean into it initially, and then let her break it apart. So yeah, definitely leaned into a lot of iconography, including the capelet. Like we went full hog with the nurse capelet from the era, a kind of Florence Nightingale effect. She eventually ends up in the last season, she dies in that. Yeah.
And the season, the production was, of course, unique in that part of it was filmed, COVID happened, and then the show resumed production months later. How did that affect the work and how you went about the season? Because it must be
right.
Especially with social distancing, COVID protocols, being dressing actors in such an intimate way must be especially challenging.
Yes. I remember when COVID hit, and we were told we were heading back to work. I was just like, how are we going to do this? My job is literally to be in a room with people dressing and undressing, you know. But MGM and Fox and all the producers were really incredible. We were actually one of the first shows back. We ended up going back in July, I think, and we were one of the kind of early people going out there, and other shows were looking to us to see how we were going to do it. I think we had the benefit of the fact that we had gotten through most of our season, really. We had been, everyone, the producers and the actors and all the department heads had been together for 7 months. So by the time we came back, you know, everyone, it was a really amazing supportive set. So everybody was so supportive of each other and just wanted to kind of understand what things each department would need to do their job safely. So when we came back for costumes anyways, it was, you know, it was a lot about creating more space. We had a fitting room and a department inside of a building on the lot in Chicago. And then when we came back, they got me this huge like construction trailer. Like I felt like I should be like a foreman at a construction site, like yelling for a crane or something. They brought one in and landed it in the middle of base camp. And that way the actors would only have to go in and out of, they wouldn't have to go inside of buildings. And we had these medical filters. And, you know, because in the beginning when we first started, nobody was 100% sure. Now we know a lot more about it doesn't, you know, about how it transmits. But back then we were wearing full medical gowns and, you know, the medical gown and the visor and the masks and staying 6 feet apart and inside of separate spaces that were completely controlled by air filters. So it was a lot. It was a little bit like doing your job inside of an aquarium. But I mean, like I said, I think we benefited from being on such a wonderful team that everyone really just supported each other, you know, and got back to work.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work this past season on Fargo and all the hard work it was to adapt to new circumstances. And you know, you can see all the work on screen, but you can't see any of the challenges, thankfully. And
so we aim for.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for the time.